Hello and welcome to the new analysis video for Bayonet Charge. Let's begin just by thinking about the poet first of all. We just have to clear something up. Ted Hughes did not fight in World War II. Okay, in fact I think he was only about 9 years old when World War II began. One really common error that people make in this poem is that they talk about the writer showing their experience of World War II, and that is not the case. He's depicting this soldier to consider the impact that conflict has on a human being, on a soldier, mentally and physically, and how it can affect somebody and how fear can control you. So he is not talking about personal experience, okay? And the other thing that we have to talk about is the narrative of the poem. So when we're talking about narrative, we mean the story, what happens in the story of the poem. And in this case, we see a soldier running across a battlefield. During war, he pauses, he thinks about why he's there and his feelings about being there. And then, as he's standing there, he sees a small hare, and the hare is a rabbit that kind of shoots past him, and it's falling over itself and it's running round in a circle, and then I think the implication actually is that it dies, and he continues to carry on running across the battlefield after he sees that. So I'm just going to read that poem to you now. Suddenly he awoke and was running, raw in raw-seamed hot khaki, his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire, hearing bullets smacking the belly out of the air. He lugged a rifle, numb as a smashed arm, the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye sweating like molten iron from the centre of his chest. In bewilderment then he almost stopped. In what cold clockwork of the stars and nations was he the hand pointing at the second? He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs, listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running, and his foot hung like statuary in mid-stride. Then the shot slashed furrows, threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame and crawled in the threshing circle, its mouth wide, open, silent, its eyes standing out. He plunged past with his bayonet towards the green hedge. King, honour, human dignity, etc. dropped like luxuries in a yelling alarm to get out of the blue crackling air. His terrors, touchy dynamite. Right, let's begin by looking at language, and let's kind of take it stanza by stanza. So in the first stanza, a lot of the language is there to show us the soldier's feelings of fear. So if we look particularly on an obvious level, we've got this idea of him sweating, implying fear, anxiety, nervousness. But look at the fact that it's combined with the adjective of heavy. It's as if it's a burden on him, something he hasn't chosen, something he doesn't want. And as we move along, we see the idea that he has a rifle as numb as a smashed arm. So we've got that simile there. Think of an arm, it's something we need, it's a really important limb, and if it's smashed, it implies that a part of him can't work, it can't push forward, and the fact that he lugs the rifle and it's numb suggests that it doesn't feel natural to him, that he doesn't want to use it, that it doesn't feel like it's part of him. And then we've got that patriotic tear, so patriotic meaning a love of your country, but here it brims in his eye and then it sweats like molten iron. So it's that idea of pain and panic that comes from it. It's not something that's romanticised here at all. The other really interesting thing about this particular scene, I think, is the repetition of these H and S sounds, the alliteration of s, s, s. And it's almost as if that pattern of sound in that first stanza reflects his really heavy breathing, which I think again implies a real fear in him and a panic. One line that I think really stands out as well when I read it out loud was bullets smacking the belly out of the air. Look at that word smacking, the violent tone of that and the implication of that upon him as he tries to take on that experience. And all of this destruction is combined with this idea of the green hedge. Think about the connotations of the word green. Its links to nature, life, youth. So look at that complete contrast between destruction and youth, and I think that's almost an implication that it's completely wasted that he's there, that it's a waste of a young life, and that actually it makes this quite tragic as we experience his fear with him. As we move forward, it starts to consider his opinions as to why he's there, and we see this beautiful metaphor of in what cold clockwork of the stars and nations was he the hand pointing that second. So first of all, let's look at this idea of cold clockwork. So cold and clockwork, to me, they bring to mind things that are dehumanised, they're mechanical, they're monotonous, they happen over and over again. And I think that starts to imply this disillusionment the soldier has with the war and the effort that he's making. And look at the fact that it's about stars and nations, so it's about politics, cold politics. I think that there is the writer commenting on the lack of human sensitivity during war, that actually it's all a game of politics, that it doesn't consider the impact that it's having on this soldier at the beginning. And really interestingly, he's chosen for him to be the second hand. So what hand pointing that second? Well, I take it in my reading that it's a second hand. So a hand, it is really important, isn't it? And that second hand keeps it ticking over. But actually, if it's a second hand, if it's not an hour, it doesn't have as prominent job in the clock. So I would imply that actually the soldier's feeling a little bit inferior, a little bit pointless, a little bit meaningless. And the fact that he's running like a man who's jumped up in the dark runs, I mean, that to me brings complete visions of a nightmare. The idea of waking up in the middle of the night and being completely disorientated. I think it reflects the fact that he doesn't really know where he is or what he's doing, and again enhancing that fear within him. Then as we go on, we have this really interesting parallelism between him and the hare. So the hare almost reflects what's happening with the soldier. So if we think of a hare, we think of something linked to fragility, something that is easily panicked, easily scared, something very quick in movement. And I think that reflects the soldier's emotions. But we've also got the idea that it rolls like a flame, like it's rolling over and over on itself, which reflects this idea that he was stumbling and panicking. And the fact that it crawls in a threshing circle, to me that shows a real distress for the hare. And I think that also mirrors that panic that's taking place within the soldier, that he is really struggling mentally to process what's happening. And then when its mouth is wide open and silent, its eyes standing out, to me personally, in my reading of the poem, I take it to mean that the hare has died. You could take that as foreshadowing if you wanted to, that it perhaps foreshadows that the soldier will not make it through this conflict. But I think also the sheer barbaric death of that hare forces the soldier on. So whilst the fear is something that slows him down, it's also the thing that keeps him motivated to survive. The most interesting line, I think, in that third stanza is king, honour, human dignity, etc. dropped like luxuries in a yelling alarm. Look at king, honour and human dignity. They're the three things that stereotypically a soldier is told they are fighting for. But interestingly, in this list, it's paired with the word etc. at the end. So I think actually etc. implies that there's a lack of care, or it's almost as if the soldier has stopped believing that's why he's there. He's not buying into it. Oh yeah, etc. So I think that could also imply to us that actually the poet believes there is no human dignity here, and that's supported entirely by the mental strain that we've seen on the soldier at the beginning. And the fact that they're dropped like luxuries implies that actually if they're a luxury, it's something that they can't even think about. It's not something that is important to make you survive. So I think there's quite an interesting comment there about patriotism, and you could consider what you think the writer's trying to say about patriotism. One other thing to have a little look at in the language is the use of verbs. So if we look along the top, we had things like stumbling and running and smacking and lugging. Towards the end, we have verbs like crawled. We do have plunged appear again, but dropped. As it comes through, I think the verbs become far more passive. And that, to me, mirrors this idea that the soldier is losing faith and losing momentum. So I think actually we're meant to feel quite sympathetic for this soldier and the impact that the war has on him. After that, I would say remember that if you want to go for these high grades, you have to think about structure as well as language. And right at the very beginning, I would talk about the idea that it begins in medias res, in the middle of something happening. So suddenly he awoke and was running. That's that. When you first read it, it's a little confusing. What is he running from? Where is he? What is he doing? And I think that's really important because it places confusion in the reader, and that almost places us in the shoes of the soldier. He is confused, he is disorientated, and so are we. So it helps us to understand that fear and panic within him. As we move forward, if you look at the top stanza, it's made of 8 lines, and so is the last one, but the middle one is only made of 7. And within that middle one, we have the rhetorical question particularly. And I think those 7 lines and the rhetorical question really slow the pace of the poem in the second stanza. And if you think about the fact that he stands still, not only does it mirror his physical movement, but I think it mirrors that idea that his involvement in the war slows down and that he's really trying to process what's happening, that he's almost paralysed with fear. And then as he sees the hare, that pace picks up again. So that's kind of mirrors the idea that he gets up and he keeps going again. And we've also got enjambment where the lines are just running into each other at the beginning and at the end. And I think that again, that quick pace as you read it really mirrors the panic within the soldier. The other thing that I would look at is look at the last stanza. It's the only time where we see full stops used. It creates a much blunter tone. There's much more of a finality to it. And it's as if the soldier's made up his mind. Actually, he doesn't believe in this war anymore. And that he has to survive. I think questions that you could use this poem for. Think about things like soldier experience, impact of conflict, writers' opinions of conflict, and you could also look at how fear is presented in poetry. And I would suggest, as a little bit of revision, you may wish to have a little go at this exam question. So explore the way that soldier experience is presented in Bayonet Charge and one other poem of your choice. I hope that's been useful. Please head over to www.mrsheducates.co.uk if you need any further help with revision. I've also got the TES shop online, and there are lots of quotation cards and revision cards that you can download on there as a student as well. Thank you.